Essays on Untouchables and Untouchability, Political by Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Chapter 3 2. The opposition of the Hindus is a determined opposition bent on stamping out the revolt at any cost. In this, they are prepared to use any means and go to any length. This revolt of the untouchables has been met with equally determined attack on the part of the Hindus. How cruel the Hindus can be in suppressing this revolt of the untouchables will appear from one of two cases. On the occasion of the entry of the untouchables in the chowder tank at Mahad in the exercise of their right to take water from a public place, the assault made upon the untouchables who had attended the conference and taken part in the march upon the tank has been described in the Bombay Chronicle in the following terms. The procession was a most peaceful one and everything passed off quietly. But after about 2 hours of some evil-minded leaders of the town raised a false alarm that the depressed classes were planning to enter the temple of Vireshwar, whereupon a large crowd of riffraff had collected all armed with bamboo sticks. The crowd soon became aggressive and the whole town at once became a surging mass of rowdies who seemed to be out for the blood of the depressed classes. The depressed classes were busy in taking their meal before dispersing to the village. When a large part of them had left the town, the rowdies entered the kitchen where the depressed classes were taking their food. There would have been a regular battle between the two forces, but the depressed classes were held back by their leaders, and thus a far more serious riot was averted. The rowdies, finding no occasion for provocation, began patrolling the main street and assaulting the members of the depressed classes who, in stray batches, were passing along on their way to their villages and committed trespass in the houses of several depressed class people and gravely assaulted them. In all, the number of wounded amongst the depressed classes is supposed to be as large as 20. In this, the attitude of the depressed classes was as commendable as the attitude of the many of the upper classes was unworthy. The depressed classes assembled vastly outnumbered the upper classes, but as the object of their leaders was to do everything in a non-violent and absolutely constitutional manner, they set their faces against any aggression on the part of the depressed classes. It speaks a great deal in favor of the depressed classes that although the provocation given to them was immense, they kept their self-control. The Mahad conference has shown that the upper classes are not willing to allow the depressed classes to enjoy such elementary civic rights as taking water from public water sources. The most reprehensible part of the conduct of the upper caste Hindus in Mahad and Kolaba district was that messages were sent immediately to the different villages asking the upper classes people there to punish the delegates of the conference as soon as they returned to their respective villages. In obedience to this mandate, assaults were committed on a number of Mahars returning from the conference either before or after they reached their villages, where the repressed classes had the disadvantage of being overwhelmed, outnumbered by the upper caste Hindus. The leaders of the depressed classes have appealed to the authorities for protection, and the district officials, including the district superintendent of police, are making inquiries on the spot. It must, however, be stated that if the resident magistrate had not allowed two precious hours to pass without doing anything, the riot would have probably been averted. The assault committed on the untouchables as a result of the Kalaram's temple satyagraha was no less severe. The third instance is more recent and occurred in the year 1935 in the village of Kavitha in Dholka Taluka of the Ahmedabad district of the Bombay Presidency. The Bombay government having issued orders requiring the admission of the children of untouchables in public schools, it is reported that on August 8, 1935, the untouchables of the village, Kavitha, took 4 of their children to be admitted to the village school. Many caste Hindus from the village had gathered near the school. This account of the incident is a translation of the statement sent to me by the secretary of the Nava Yuga Mandal of Dholka witnessed this. This occasion for admission passed off quietly and nothing untoward happened. The next day, however, the caste Hindus of the village withdrew their children from the school as they did not like their children sitting with those of the untouchables and getting themselves polluted. Sometime thereafter, an untouchable from the village was assaulted by a Brahmin. On August 12th, the male members of the untouchables of the village had come to Dholka to file a criminal complaint against the Brahmin in the court of the magistrate. Coming to know that the adult members of the untouchables were absent, the Hindus of the village invaded the quarters of the untouchables. They were armed with sticks, spears, and swords. Among the invaders were caste Hindu women. They started attacking the old men and women of the untouchables. Some of these victims fled to the jungles, while some shut themselves up. These invaders directly directed their vehemence against those untouchables who were suspected of having taken a lead in the matter of the admission of their children in the village school. They broke open their doors and, not finding them in, they broke the tiles and rafters of the roofs over their houses. Terror-stricken, these untouchable men and women who were assaulted and beaten were anxious about the safety of those of their elders who had gone to Dholka and who were expected back that night. The caste Hindus, knowing that the leaders of the untouchables who had gone to Dholka would be returning sometime in the night, went out of the village fully armed to assault them and had concealed themselves behind the bushes and scrubs of the way to the village. Having come to know of this, an old untouchable woman crept out of the village in the dark, met the leaders who were returning, and informed them that the armed guard gangs of caste Hindus were hiding themselves to waylay them, and that therefore they should not come into the village. They refused to listen, fearing that the caste Hindus might do greater mischief in their absence. At the same time, they were afraid that if they did enter the village, they might be assaulted. They therefore decided to wait outside the village in the fields till after midnight. In the meantime, the gang of caste Hindus who were in ambush waited and finally gave up the game and retired. The leaders of the untouchables entered the village after about 3 a.m. in the night. If they had come earlier and met the murderous gang, they would have probably been done to death. On seeing the harm done to person and property, they left the village for Ahmedabad before daybreak and informed the secretary of the Harijan Seva Sangh, a body organized by Gandhi to look after the welfare of the untouchables. But the secretary was helpless. Not only did the caste Hindus use physical violence, but they conspired to make the life of the untouchables intolerable. They refused to engage them as laborers, they refused to sell them foodstuffs, they refused to give them facilities for grazing their cattle, and they committed stray assault on untouchable men and women. Not only this, but the caste Hindus in their frenzy poured kerosene oil in the well from which the untouchables had to get their supply of drinking water. This they did for days together. The result was that the untouchables of the village had no water. When things reached this stage, the untouchables thought of filing a criminal complaint before a magistrate, which they did on 17th October, making some of the caste Hindus as the accused. The strange part of the case is the part played by Gandhi and his lieutenant Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. With all the knowledge of tyranny and oppression practiced by the caste Hindus of Kavidha against the untouchables, all that Mr. Gandhi felt like doing was to advise the untouchables to leave the village. He did not even suggest that the miscreant should be hauled up before a court of law. His henchman, Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel, played a part which was still more strange. He had gone to Kavita to persuade the caste Hindus not to molest the untouchables, but they did not even give him a hearing. Yet this very man was opposed to the untouchables, hauling them up in a court of law and getting them punished. The untouchables filed the complaint notwithstanding his opposition, but he immediately and ultimately forced them to withdraw the complaint against the caste Hindus, making some kind of a show of an undertaking not to molest, an undertaking which the untouchables can never enforce. The result was that the untouchables suffered and their tyrants escaped with the aid of Mr. Gandhi's friend, Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel. This systematic oppression of the untouchables is resorted to by the caste Hindus even in small matters such as the wearing of better clothes or the wearing of jewelry. Two such instances may be cited. The end.